coming up in all angles: brain fog, anxiety, depression.
COVID isn't something that just affects the lungs.
Concerns now that some people who get COVID-19 may develop mental health problems.
It was really torture between not being able to sleep much at all, not being able to focus while working.
My head feel like it was going to explode. I feel like I couldn't think clearly.
2 Jamaicans share their stories. Thank you so much for joining us for another edition of All Angles. I'm Dion Jax Miller. Now, just on a programming note, this month All Angles celebrated 15 years on air. So big up to our graphics department. You'll see in a corner of our screen a little updated bug, we call it, the logo, showing 15 years on the usual All Angles logo. In addition, starting today, every program, at the end of every program, we're going to be having a very short flashback to a previous program, and in some weeks we will have an update on the story or the issue that we had initially reported on. Today we're going to have a little bit of an excerpt from what is still the most impactful and popular program we've done on All Angles, which was the bleaching phenomenon. So that comes up at the very end of the program. So as we said in the introduction, we're going to be focusing on mental health issues and COVID, not the issue of the pandemic causing people to feel depressed and being at home, but what is now emerging as an area of research, which is the impact of COVID-19 on the brain and people who come out experiencing mental health problems. Now, my guest a little bit later on is going to be Howard Jackson, an IT manager. For full disclosure, he's actually my brother. And before that, we're going to be talking to Sophia Hay. But before we go to Sophia, let's go to this overview by producer Javon Keys.
More and more research is showing a link between contracting COVID-19 and developing some kind of mental illness. An Oxford University study published April 6, 2021 suggests an increased likelihood of mental illness in the 6 months after someone contracts COVID-19. The study analyzed over 200,000 COVID-19 survivors. Professor Musad Hussain was one of the researchers.
Over a third of people had some kind of neurological or psychiatric diagnosis after their COVID diagnosis.
The study looked at neurological and psychiatric issues. The psychiatric issues were found in all groups of COVID-19 victims.
17% of people who had COVID ended up with a diagnosis of an anxiety disorder. A little less than that ended up with a diagnosis of a mood disorder like depression. 5% had insomnia.
However, those who had severe COVID-19 requiring hospitalization and intensive care treatment were found to be at greater risk of neurological issues, including stroke and dementia. The findings corroborate a November 2020 study carried out by scientists at Oxford University. The research looked at 69 million persons, of which over 62,000 were COVID-19 patients in the USA. The study found that a diagnosis of COVID-19 was linked to an increased likelihood of a psychiatric diagnosis. In fact, nearly 6% of adults in the study diagnosed with COVID-19 developed a psychiatric disorder within 14 to 90 days of the positive COVID-19 result. That's compared to just 3.4% of patients who didn't have COVID-19. In other words, those who developed COVID-19 were 2 times more likely to develop a mood or anxiety disorder for the very first time. Anxiety disorders, insomnia, and dementia were the most common diagnoses. Reports also show COVID-19 patients frequently experience complications such as confusion, dizziness, and delirium, apparently because of how the virus interacts with the central nervous system. COVID-19 can also affect how the individual sleeps. This can have a knock-on effect, leading to insomnia, depression, anxiety, or other changes in brain activity. It's still too early to make a direct correlation between having COVID-19 and developing a mental health disorder, but more published works are suggesting there is a link. Javon Keys for All Angles.
Thank you so much, Javon. And joining us now, Sophia Hayes. Sophia is a Justice of the Peace, and she has been impacted in a number of ways by COVID-19. Thank you so much for joining us on All Angles. Really appreciate it.
Hi, Dion. Good night, everyone.
So you had COVID. Would you describe how it affected you? Did you have a severe or a mild case?
Well, I was moderately ill.
Okay. So at what point now, so you have the physical manifestations, at what point did you start to realize that, okay, something else is off, I'm being affected in these other ways?
Could you repeat?
At what point
You're a
did you
bit
start
low.
to realize, sure, at what point did you start to realize that, okay, I had COVID, it affected me physically, but I'm now being affected in other ways. My mental health is being affected. What happened?
I would say when I was in the hospital, I've never had anxiety attack before, and being in the hospital, I was anxious. I didn't want to sleep. I was scared of going to sleep because I thought I was going to die, because COVID-19 is such a deadly virus. And also I was worried about blood clots, because I heard that it gives you blood clots. And I was just really worried all over. So I was having panic attacks. The panic attacks felt like I was having a heart attack. I couldn't breathe. My chest was tight. I was having pain in my chest and all that.
You were in hospital for about 3 weeks, is that right?
No, 10 days.
10
And then I was transferred to the Eden Gardens COVID facility.
Okay. So you've come out of hospital now, so the immediate danger seems to be over. So did those problems that you spoke about go away? The anxiety, the panic attacks, did they immediately go away?
No, because the day when Ministry of Health came to take me to the COVID facility, that same day I had a huge panic attack. I started sweating, my head got hot, the place started getting dark, and I felt like I was going to faint. And then the nurse told me that it was a panic attack.
Up to that point, had you heard that there were concerns about how COVID was affecting people in those kinds of ways?
No, because when I came back from Las Vegas, that was last year June, so it was fairly new, and there was still a lot of uncertainty about it. Nobody knew much about COVID and all that.
So what did you think was happening to you?
When I was in the facility,
When you started to, all these symptoms that you're describing, the panic attacks, the anxiety attacks, the being scared and so on, what was going through your mind? How were you interpreting all of that?
I wouldn't say I was really thinking about it. As I said, I was just really scared, really depressed, because I wanted to go home. I had to be quarantined. I couldn't mix with anybody, and I'm a person who I like to be around people. I'm a busybody. I don't like to stay one place. So, it was really taxing just being one place, and you can't do anything. You're not seeing anybody, only when the nurse comes to do your vitals. Like, they would come in the morning and they would come in the evening, or when the porter would take your meals.
How long did the panic attacks continue for?
I would say during the whole time I was there at the facility.
All right, so you mentioned having difficulty breathing. Walk us through it a little bit, though. I mean, how would you know that one was coming on, one was about to start, and tell us what would happen and how long it would last?
Well, I wouldn't know. It just happened. It just come on by surprise. Like, for example, at one point, in the last weeks of being in the facility, I was given balcony time. And I remember the Dr. Wilson would encourage me to always, write my poems because I like to write poems. So he'd say, go and write something for me, man. And when I come back, I'll read it. And the nurses always enjoy my poems as well. So that particular day, I was on the balcony upstairs and I was writing a poem entitled My COVID Journey. And just being taken back to that place where I was remembering everything that happened from the start, how I couldn't breathe, how I thought I was going to die, the whole thing, the whole suffering I went through, because for the whole time I was calling for help and I wasn't getting any help, and all that was very frustrating. And the last point when I really thought I was going to let go, I couldn't hold on anymore, and that's when I went to the hospital. So writing the poem, then I started feeling my chest start getting, it just hit me by surprise. My chest started getting really tight. I couldn't breathe. There was excruciating pain in my chest. And then I thought I was having a heart attack. So I started screaming, and then Mr. Walcott, the porter, he came running to me, and then he went downstairs and called Nurse O'Connor and they both came up quickly and they took me back down to my room, and then they called Dr. Wilson, and Dr. Wilson said I wasn't, because it really felt like I was going to die, like I didn't even know that it's how a panic attack. That one was like so different from the others. And then we were assigned psychologists. So like, I guess they knew that persons would be getting panic attack from time to time. So I don't remember her name, but I had a psychologist assigned to me, and she took me through some breathing techniques, and she told me about, I remember what you call it, but like I was supposed to think about a happy time in my life, and then it would eventually well, when I did what she said, the panic attack eventually subsides.
Okay, a little later in the program, I want to talk a little bit more about treatment. But since you left the facility, have you had any issues in terms of anxiety or anything like that?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Have you since heard or read about this concern now about the possible link between COVID-19 and mental health issues such as anxiety, for instance, which you've described?
No, because whenever I think about COVID-19 or whenever I see the statistics coming up on the news, I try to stay away from it. I try not to read anything because it keeps putting me back where I was, and it forcing me to remember. And I kind of like block that out of my mind and try not to, remember.
Okay, and of course you had told us previously when we spoke on radio that apart from having it yourself, your father also had contracted COVID, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Yes, and actually succumbed to it as well. So when you say you don't want to be taken back, there's a whole lot there for you. Did you feel that, because you said you were assigned psychologists and so on, was that something you were at all resistant to in terms of speaking with a mental health professional, a doctor, trying to work through those issues?
Yes, of course I was, because I was just thinking, why are they giving me a psychologist? Something is wrong with me. Okay, I just have COVID. And I resisted. I didn't want to talk to her. I keep complaining to Dr. Wilson that why does she have to call me, Dr. Wilson? I don't want to speak to her. Sorry, doc. No. I hope you don't feel bad. I hope you understand. It was just the illness.
So how long did it take you to get past that resistance?
I didn't get past it. I asked the doctor not to let her call me.
Really?
I asked the doctor not to let her call me back because I wasn't going to speak to her. And then he said, okay. But Dr. Wilson is awesome. He would, like, whenever I'm getting attacked, and then the nurse would call him and put him on the phone, and I speak to him, he calms me right down.
All right. Hold that thought for me, Sophia. We're going to go to the break, and we'll come back to you a little bit later in the program and continue to talk about those issues of treatment and getting over issues like this. So stay tuned, listeners. Viewers, remember our hashtag is TVJ All Angles, and we're back in a moment.